Welcome one and all to the Game Lore series, where I, Questionable Ole, explore in-game lore and history of different games. This video is the second part of the original Might and Magic universe timeline, which will cover a period of roughly 800 years. Before we begin, if you have not seen the part 1, I strongly recommend doing so before watching this video. It will give you the scope and a larger context of the current universe. As we start, we need to briefly revisit and expand on a few key events occurred a few centuries earlier. Continent Enroth served as a base for colonial government up until and shortly after the Silence. They had access to advanced factories called Heavenly Forges, which were capable of producing powerful artifacts. Android Guardian of Enroth, Melian, considers seeding a success, leaves his physical form by copying himself into central planetary computer, becoming the Oracle of Enroth. Successful seeding assumes that interplanetary travel and exchange was still in effect. For example, descendants of Kellan bloodline from original Kron vehicle arrived and stayed. In Antagarich, Empire of Bracadun was formed by powerful wizard kings. Barbarian hero Jarg the Conqueror unites oppressed barbarian tribes in Wasteland region, otherwise known as the Revolt, against the wizard kings and overpowers them. Barbarian rule holds until after his death, when petty squabbling of his heirs allows wizard kings to restore their rule. They make a point of killing off all of the bards so that tales of legendary Jarg are forgotten. We are now ready to jump into Age of Monsters period. Colonial government is overthrown by Enrothian rebels over the course of the 1st century after Silence. The last of the Heavenly Forges breaks down during the year 113 after Silence. Ancient weapons sharply grow in rarity. At this point, we will be switching back and forth between events happening on Enroth on the right and epic adventure chronicles of a barbarian named Tarnum on the left. Majority of the chronicle stories will have an inception in one of the events on the right-hand side. We will start, however, with the first chronicle itself. It is called Warlords of the Wasteland, which takes place at the start of the 2nd century after Silence. Tarnum, a mere barbarian peasant, meets a surviving bard which tells him the legend of Jarg. Tarnum is inspired to lead the revolt against wizard kings once more, challenges and kills Rabak, chieftain of his tribe. Long conflict ensues. Tarnum's love, Yala, along with more bards are killed. Grief-struck, Tarnum invades Mudlands region and enslaves local lords. He also wants to rally remaining barbarian tribes, but many of them don't exhibit the will to fight. Thus, Tarnum brands them as traitors and orders their villages burned to the ground, unknowingly sentencing his long-lost sisters to death that way. After such violent behavior, Tarnum's advisors, including his old friend Hardak, urge him to cease the bloody conflict. But Tarnum, fearing the internal revolt, poisons them and blames that on the wizard kings. This falsely adds to the significant bloodlust and morale boost in his army. It allows Tarnum to reach and siege Castle Steelhorn, the capital of Bracadun. It is defended by Curl, a barbarian descendant of Jarg, which despises his heritage. Curl, as well as Gavin Magnus, one of the mages in Castle's garrison, are killed. Some time later, however, Gavin finds himself alive and immortal under uncertain circumstances. You can already tell that he will have an important role to play in the events yet to come. And so, after coming to terms with his new position, Gavin moves to establish a mage kingdom of Brakeda and becomes its Grand Vizier and immortal king. Snow Elves, which migrated from Enroth to Antagorich and settled on the Worry Island, forge the Sword of Frost, which will later play a big role in the universe, along with the Armageddon's Blade. A few years later, a younger generation of Worry Elves, led by Elvolas, depart the island against Elders' wishes and settle in northern Antagorich, eventually forming the kingdom of Avli. Some time after, a Brakedan cult practicing necromancy is deemed deeply blasphemous and is exiled. The cult settles in southern Avli, eventually corrupts the lands around it, and evolves into the kingdom of Deja. Around the same time, Varn-ferried races from Enroth and Antagorich start settling Jedam continent. One named Ryan Griffinheart, a former knight in the service of Brakadun, alongside Tarnum's elder sister, found Kingdom of Erathia. They later have a daughter named Alison. Ryan's armies tamed griffins, which gave him an edge in the warfare. This brings us to the end of Warlords of Wasteland's chronicle, Tarnum's death. Ryan challenges Tarnum to a duel, and though inferior in strength, is more agile and manages to slash Tarnum's stomach, inflicting a mortal wound. Tarnum dies. Before we go any further, let me quickly provide a perspective on what are the Ancestors, Hall of Judgment, and the Paradise. The Ancestors are three ancient barbarian heroes, and act as a tribunal for dead souls in the Hall of Judgment, a kind of a gateway into barbarian afterlife realm, called Paradise. One thing to understand is that it seems there are multiple afterlife bubbles in Might and Magic universe, and the Paradise is only one of them. As for Tarnum, Ancestors felt he had great potential in him, as his initial motivations were just. They could not allow him entrance to the Paradise due to his atrocities and needless killings, and decided to grant him immortality instead, and bind him to do their bidding, aiding the world of Enroth when times are most dire, thus gradually atoning for his sins. Time passes, and Queen Alison takes reign of Erathia. She has a vision that her father's soul was forcibly taken from Paradise by a demon called Jorm and brought down into the Underworld, a multi-layered underground network spanning whole Antagorich. Alison issues a call for brave knights who would be willing to assist her in storming the Underworld. Thus begins the second hero chronicle, Conquest of the Underworld. Tarnum pretends to be a knight and pledges to free Alison's father from the Underworld, though he himself is not too pleased about the prospect of aiding his killers and their family. He gains access to initial Underworld levels, and Alison, unable to sit still, follows him. She is not much of a fighter, and mostly manages finances in the camp. Tarnum begins to be beset by the nightmares of past events of his life, and slowly realizes why he is considered a tyrant. During his disabled time, Alison is being trained to lead and temporarily substitutes him. Eventually overcoming the nightmares and warming up to Alison, Tarnum resumes leadership and personally continues to train her. They advance to lower levels of Underworld. They secure the help of one called Dizelisk, Duke of the Underworld, who lends them his demon army. Together, they defeat Jorm. It is at this point Desalisk reveals his true intentions, and we find out that it was he who wanted to capture Allison all along, to use her torture as a way to chip Ryan's soul, who, it turns out, has blinded Desalisk in one of the past battles. Tarnum is killed, and Allison is captured, all according to plan. Tarnum's immortality permits him to return to life. Advised by the fading soul essence of Ryan, he amasses big force with the aid of capable adventurers he encountered by chance, and nobles of Erasia from above. During the assault, Desalisk is slaughtered, Allison is freed, and resumes her place as Erathia's monarch, and Ryan's soul returns safely back to paradise. Returning to events timeline, in year 342 AS, Umberlian Empire is founded in southern Jedam. It would go to dominate surrounding lands for a few centuries. A few generations since, someone only known to be the Mad King Griffonheart is in the throne of Erathia, ruling through fear and ruthlessness. It is at that time the Mudlands region begin to revolt against their appointed steward, Earl Rambert. To stop Mudlanders, who by the way are led by Tarnum, disguised as local Beastmaster on behest of the ancestors, Mad King sends his 16-year-old son Niven to help. This leads to the third chronicle, Revolt of the Beastmasters. Niven, though young, was already considered a genius tactician. He understood that to quench the uprising he needed to get Tarnum, and all others were not necessary. Tarnum, meanwhile, learns from his sources that Mad King had sent Niven here to get himself killed. Mad King would use that as a strong rally cause to amass an army. Tarnum abducts Niven and with some time convinces him to join forces by showing the horrors of slavery. Niven stands together with Tarnum and Droglo, Tarnum's young Mudlarder's protege. Meanwhile, Earl Rambert holds a lot of Mudlanders prisoners and threatens to kill them unless Tarnum releases Niven. Tarnum and Niven devise a plan where Niven would be transported back in the cage, but later would stage a coup. However, at night, during cage transfer, the envoy was ambushed by Earl Rambert. Droglo manages to kill him during the fight. Tarnum realizes his army is inferior and that he needs to seek allies. He asks Droglo to travel to Krevlod to seek barbarian help. Droglo is absent for a prolonged period of time and returns with heavy scars on the face, telling that he was forced to prove himself in mortal combat, which he managed to win. Tarnum is heartbroken and angered by such barbarian behavior, as it was not the way he remembers they conducted their business earlier. Nevertheless, barbarians are on board. At the same time, Mudlander wise women give a new name to the seceding region, Tetelia, which means community, in a forgotten language now only known to the witches. Mad King ventures into Tetelia with an army that is still surpassing Tarnum's, forcing him to adopt guerrilla tactics at night to chip at King's army. Droglo prevents assassination of Niven. Meanwhile, Niven secures support of Erathian nobles and is swiftly crowned rightful king of Erathia. His and Tarnum's forces pin Mad King's army down, albeit at a great cost to barbarians, and in the final battle, Tarnum kills Mad King, but is also seemingly mortally injured. His body mysteriously disappears. Droglo becomes the leader of Tetelia. He and Niven sign a treaty to ban slavery between Ereithia and Totalia. In year 428 AS, Terax, Enroth's first archmage, increases his powers with powerful crystal and lays the foundation of light and dark magic. From that point on, every new archmage on the continent would be guided by the study of Crystal of Terax. On the brink of 6th century AS, Celeste, the capital of Bracada, was constructed up in Bracada Highlands region. During same period, Hareg I founds the Empire of Endless Ocean, or Empire of Regna Island. Native troll population is forced to resettle to Murmur Woods region in Jedem. The later part of 6th and beginning of 7th centuries marked the fall of Umberlian Empire. Last ruler Thorn III constructs the Vault of Time in the area later to become Ravenshore and stores last of Umberlian regalia in there. Around year 650 marks the start of 150-year-old conflict between Ereithia and Avli, called Timber Wars. It began with Ereithia expanding their territory into elven forest lands. Avli demanded a price paid equivalent to amount of cut-down trees as retribution, but Ereithia did not oblige. The conflict takes place around northern Ereithia region, known as Phyrexia, and results in a peace treaty signed at year 789, with neither side gaining much grounds, but instead with establishment of something known as contested lands, with Castle Harmondale as its core. Period around 750 AS marks the end of 10,000-year-long truce between elemental lords, and they are more than eager to exact revenge on descendants of King Calon from Kron, which are now living on Enroth planet. This marks the beginning of last hero chronicle in the Age of Monsters, known as Masters of the Elements. Ancients send Tarnum to Bracada, where he secures Gavin Magnus's forces and conquers the last remaining conflux on Enroth, which holds the gateway to the clouds, a portal to elemental planes. Venturing into air and water planes, however, reveals that Schwaland and Aqualander have left their respective planes and managed to destroy the portal, trapping Tarnum inside. Tarnum ventures forward into Earth plane and is very surprised to find mage Remus there, who was conducting experiments on Earth golems back in Enroth 200 years ago, but then vanished and was presumed dead. Only 16 years had passed for him in this Earth plane. Seeing as Gralcor, Lord of Earthplane, had also left, Tarnum begins to understand the plot of elemental lords to use time variations between Enroth and the planes for their advantage. Tarnum appoints Remus as his second-in-command as they venture into Plane of Fire. They begin to suspect the existence of the fifth plane, the Plane of Magic, and eventually manage to contact Psychic Elemental from there, who tells them to seek alliance with the First, a group of 3 elder magic elementals. Tarnum focuses on that goal and manages to convince the First to join forces. This, however, prevents him from rescuing phoenixes that are trapped in a pyre in the Plane of Fire. With the help of magic elementals, Tarnum returns to Enroth, only to realize that 30 years had passed during his departure. Some of elemental forces are treated very poorly during the war by elemental lords, and take sides with Tarnum. Together they succeed in defeating the lords. Lastly, fearing power abuse from Bracada, Tarnum asks psychic elementals to erase knowledge of how to get to elemental planes from the brains of all the mages. This marks the end of the Chronicle. Lastly, in the last decades of 8th century, region of Phyrexia and contested lands declare independence from Erathia. At the same time, a skilled craftsman, Mechorik the Blind, forges many powerful artifacts geared towards humans to aid them end the Age of Monsters and advance into the Age of Men. And this, my friends, concludes the period known as the Age of Monsters. If you found this video enjoyable, click a like button, leave your thoughts down in the comment section, and hit the subscribe button and the bell buttons to get notified about future videos. Thank you all, and Ode out.